Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I've got another interview here today. This is what I'm looking forward to. Successful company and a strong interview. I've had the opportunity and the pleasure to sit down with Brandon Macdonald from Fireweed Metals a couple of times here, and he's with me again today. Brandon, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, and again, yeah, thank you for your time and thank you for this opportunity to come on this show. Before I kind of dive into things with you here, typical disclaimers, right? Blue sky comments will be made, forward-looking statements, not financial advice. Full disclaimer will be written notes, but I don't want to spend too much time here belaboring anything. I don't want to get into this with Brandon. I think that I just mentioned off screen to Brandon, I don't want to spend too much time, kind of the typical summary treatment that you might see. I think that Fireweed is a pretty well-known name. And I think that the stories are well known. I think that maybe the kind of focusing on details and maybe a little bit of kind of sidestepping and rabbit chasing a little bit might be of value here. But I guess with that having been said, I'll just contradict myself, Brandon. Just for the sake of framing this conversation, providing some context, do you mind just your classic elevator pitch, right? I mean, you've got three projects. How do you when you're pitching it to people? How do you sell people on what you guys have there?
Yeah, we describe ourselves as a critical metal explorer developer, right? And the real flagship project is the Macmillan Pass or Mac Pass zinc lead silver project in Eastern Yukon Territory, Canada. Pretty clearly emerging as a preeminent zinc district globally. Like this is big, right? It's big. It's material. It is going to be a hugely material zinc producer for generations. Right next to it, we have Mactung. I think there's little argument that it's probably the best tungsten deposit in the world, right? And that's that's a massively forward-looking and bold statement to say, right? But it just in terms of scale and grade, it's just like a crazy outlier. We see the potential there to meet a lot of the West tungsten demand for generations, right? We could think about everything North America needs for 50 years, kind of, right? And this is a metal dominated by China, right? So this is very topical these days. And lastly, we have our Gayna project in Northwest Territories. That's exploration, super intriguing exploration thesis there. The model we're following is unique globally in terms of only existing one other place in the world and produced one of the most unique and high grade zinc deposits in the world. That is the Kapushi deposit owned by Ivanhoe Mines. So that's early stage, but super interesting. And I think, per your point about not needing to go through the whole thing, people who get this far into this interview, if you don't know Fireweed, go to the Fireweed website, like pause this, go to the Fireweed website, watch one of my corporate presentations and then come back, right? Because I think you're right. Like, I think this is an opportunity to deep dive, and I know you do your research. So I'd rather get into that than the performative basic stuff.
Yeah, reading through the slideshow, right? And I think you've already touched on a couple of reasons that obviously it makes sense that you have. But I mean, I think that there's a classic train of thought when it comes to, explorers and companies themselves, developers themselves, but also investors find best in class, right? I think that that's kind of what you guys represent. You discussed the unique properties of your tungsten project. Mac Pass itself and Gayna itself look to be that cut above that tier one potential, and don't diddle around looking, kind of hard scrabble 500,000 ounces out of the ground of gold or something. Find best in class, right? And so more niche, but yeah, still that critical kind of passage to value. One more now, just because I think this is a couple of questions I had from people, and this is a classic question that I'll usually bring this at the end of my interviews, but I'll front load this one so we can kind of get into the meat of things later. But 2024, can you just run us through what to expect from your three? I'll touch on this later, but I mean, we see economic studies coming up. We see mineral resource estimates potentially. There's maybe new targets all along. I mean, I'll ask you about gold here in a second too, but it's a full plate, right? You're in the middle of this huge run of development and success, and it looks like you'll kind of continue into 2024 hitting the ground running. So yeah, what do we expect? What can we see from Fireweed in 2024?
Yeah, it's a tough question to answer because I don't think we've wrapped our head around how we want to proceed. Um, these are not great markets, right? And there's that expression, the market tells you how fast to go. So if I thought Fireweed was fairly valued or somewhat fairly valued, and that there was all the capital I wanted to execute the strategies, the optimal strategies or the maximal sort of strategy. We'd be simultaneously engaging in a large, cross district exploration program and a program at Gayna, while simultaneously doing infill drilling and de-risking engineering permitting exercises for Mac Pass and Mac Tongue. The quantum of spend to accomplish all of that would be a lot, right? It's a lot, and the Hollywood problem of having not just a big project but two big projects, and is that they're hungry. So this is, to kind of give you an idea where our head's at as a management team and a board is that we're just not entirely sure about 2024 yet. That we've never been a company. We're not like, autocratic. I don't dictate, how things are going to be. I don't have a board that just hangs out for the options and rubber stamps what the CEO wants to do. We have very informed and evidenced and robust discussions and arguments, and we try to come up with what we think is going to be the right plan. Ultimately, any plan you want to execute on has to be doable in terms of the funding there for it. I think we're actually in a unique position. I think you look at that most of the market probably couldn't raise much money right now. I think we could. Do I want to? I don't know, right? So we've a reasonable amount of money in the bank. I don't know what it is right now, but we're evaluating options. So I think that's kind of where the headspace is at. So I know that's not an answer of like what's 2024 going to be, but I think that's kind of where we're thinking, and I think the end members, the most extreme end members, what I described is like the full-fledged program where we're spending a $1 bajillion, right? And the other end member is like, hey, this market is terrible. These prices are bad. We don't want to raise the money. Let's just slow this to a crawl. That's not. I don't love that strategy because I think it ends up kind of biting you in the ass a little bit. Like I think there's this idea that in a perfect market, in an efficient market, if you avoid dilution, you will be rewarded for that. It's kind of true. But if you lose momentum, you'll be punished for it. And if the bull market comes and you're kind of caught flat-footed, you might not get the run that you think. Like it's not like you're going to normalize to the fair value versus, the alternate universe company version of the company that continued to progress, right? So you kind of have to balance not being foolish with dilution, but also not stopping and not boring your shareholders, losing them, and risking not being a going concern when a bull market arrives. Because make no mistake, it's the companies that are already moving and have imminent news flow that are going to move the first and the furthest when a good market arrives.
Well, then I'm off script here. The question that I kind of beg to ask then is an approach in response to Gayna. Then is that somewhat what that was? I mean, I know it has potential to be huge. You already have two taggers by the tail with Mac Pass and Mac Tongue, right? And so for me, I mean, you call it Hollywood problems, this embarrassment of riches sort of thing. The risk of maybe, like you say, one getting lost in the shuffle. But I guess the question about the acquisition of Gayna, which is recent, was that in a bid to maybe try to continue feeding a market that wants that sort of constant news flow, or that didn't really factor into it at all?
No, it was purely opportunistic, right? Dr. Jack Milton, our VP Geology, geological Jesus, as we call him, with his long hair and beard. um, he pointed out this paper that was written on Gayna that compared it to Kapushi, and said, this is open ground. And this is at 30,000 meters of drilling. There is a zinc system there. It's open ground. It's remote, but nobody's tested this thesis. So we discussed with the board, and we decided for the acquisition cost of $40,000 outright to be full owner with no royalties. It kind of felt like, all right, let's do this. Every dollar after that had to kind of be carefully justified, because we could have just held it, done a nice presentation on it, and maybe farmed it out to another junior, or maybe convinced a Jogmec or whoever to joint venture with us to explore it. But we decided to do some basic work, so we've done. I want to say the total cost to us must be around 400,000 or 500,000 worth of geophysics, mapping, soils, etc. on it. And there's another airborne survey in the budget for early spring. So I think it'll maybe come to 600,000 we've spent on it, right? We get about, depending on which analyst you report on ours, you read. I think one gave us 25 million in NAV for that. And I think they have us trading at like a 0.3 NAV or something like that, right? So 7.5 million market cap of ours they're attributing to Gayna for a cost of 600,000, right? So this is right now. It's not always that simple, but so that was probably where it came from. It wasn't like Lassonde curve trying to outsmart the Lassonde curve kind of thing, right? We recognize there's a unique thing there of like MacPass is still exciting, and I think there's good reason to think MacPass could be exciting a lot longer, but it could get boring, and maybe Gayna can become exciting. That's kind of like was an unintended consequence of the acquisition, not an explicit declared intention.
Sure. Yeah, fair. And so you referenced Jack, and I've got a series of questions that it builds to a conversation I want to have around him. And so I might just kind of trace back here and with this forward-looking thought of getting to Jack and talking about what he does with your team. So, but Brandon, you yourself, right? You got a geology degree, if I'm not mistaken. Spent a few years in banking. You come to the C-suite public resource side with Fireweed. You're a founding member as one of 4 founding members when it goes public in 2018 from the IPO. You're CEO, and I you fast forward to now, and of course, I'm sure it's been a grueling grind for you for the last 5-6 years. But my point that I want to get to here is that, you discuss difficult markets and challenging markets. And if we look back at the past 1 to 2 years, Fireweed is a success story, right? That this is, I think, in a lot of ways, you and your team have modeled what both individuals in your seat and individuals in my seat and private investors all want to see in terms of a successful project and successful development, successful team. And I'm not here to just kind of pump your tires and blow smoke and make you feel good about yourself, which sure.
Although I appreciate it, I do.
Yeah, good, right? Yeah, but no, I mean, what's more critically, right? That we should be learning from success cases, right? You can learn from failures as well, but these success cases of which I think it's fair to call you one, right? That Fireweed is unquestionably a major success the last couple of years, and so I kind of, I've got a couple conversations here I want to have with you, and maybe more kind of like philosophically. What culture or approach, you being CEO, you're in a leadership position. What culture or approach have you and your team brought that you credit with that? What do you look at and you reflect on the last 5 or 6 years that you see as having contributed to what you see now?
There's a variety of things, and I don't think it can be understated or overstated that the first and most important thing is the project. And people talk about like start with the team. It's like, yeah, I mean, I get that mentality of because there's almost no project so good that the wrong team can't screw it up, right? In fact, there may not be any project that good. But ultimately, what we're finding was put there. There's a lot of uncertainty, and depending on what we're looking at, the tungsten, the zinc, and everything, somewhere between 50 to 400 million years ago. And it was either there for us to find or it wasn't. Right. So that's the first thing. So when part of your success comes from exploration, and I think you look at, there's no doubt that the emergence of Boundary as an important part of the MacPass project, has been a big part of our success. It had to be there. So it was. That's box number one checked. But you have to find it. And I think that's really a lot of credit. Well, I mean, the lion's share of the credit goes to the geology team led by Jack, who, you look in 2020, there was a theory, because we didn't understand the mineralization at boundary exactly. He had the theory that there could be a replaced barite body near what we were seeing, near the kind of broad low-grade intersections. So we did a gravity survey. We found an anomaly. We developed the best targets. I think 2 out of the 3 holes or something like that. Not all the holes, but a couple of them hit. And we discovered the massive sulfide zone there that's been the real prize that's been emerging in that part of the project over the last couple of years. And even this year, like the zone connecting Boundary West and Main, which we now understand is just boundary. That was another theory that came in off-season analysis, and this thesis, a way to test the thesis, and success. Not all our testing has been successful, right? 2018, we did quite a bit of testing of some new targets and basically came up, snake eyes on basically all of them. And a couple of the targets this year, Boundary South, as we called it, was a still unexplained gravity anomaly, which we now explained, and it's not anything interesting, seems to be. Kobuk put a couple holes in. The gravity anomaly there again seems to be something different, although we're getting little stringers of zinc veining that that one's not done. We're still intrigued by that one. But there's a lot of that, it's not all like, stepping up to the plate and smashing everyone out of the park, right? So, and I think that it comes down to patient backers. Not all of them. I know some, much to my disappointment, seem extremely impatient. A board that let us take some risks, right? Then effective communication to the market on what we found. I feel like we've been a success. I experienced no end of frustration with the fact that we closed at 119 today. Our first day of trading in 2017, I think we closed at 91 cents, right? So since then, we've hit as high as 214, as low as 30 cents, I think. And I feel like we've been consistently doing well. And yet here we are, 6 years later, 6.5 years later, 30% higher, right? This drives me nuts. And a lot of second guessing of, did I communicate right? Did I pick the wrong backers who blew us out and then I had to sell the shares twice? Did I, should I have raised less? Should I have raised more to spend that some, you kind of go nuts. And I had a good conversation with a friend of mine at a recent conference, and he kind of gave me a little bit of a pep talk, right? And it was kind of like, look, you have to look at the context you're operating in, right? And if you could go back in time and do all those different things that I talked about doing, potentially, or you take a bunch of different approaches. Like I said, the multiverse of fireweeds. I think the current fireweeds in the top quintile of outcomes, right? Like I don't think, like, given the extreme headwinds really since 2018, and the challenge in getting people interested in zinc in particular, that there was going to be a lot of scenarios or any tweaks we could have made that would have saw us at $5 right now, right? As much as I think that could or should have been very possible, very achievable. So we're doing well, and I like our momentum. I like that, with the Lundin Group in, we have extremely strong backers. who, as evidenced by their massive success in the Vicuña district that has taken 2 decades, are not impatient, right? Um, you know, they'll be impatient if they don't think I'm doing a good job, right? But that they understand that good science takes time, and these things take time to emerge. Um, so I think, yeah, yeah, look, I credit, so basically the geology, um, the 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 right backers, and a board that gets it, um, and then good science and a good team and a good culture within the company.
And yeah, there's lots I want to touch on there, but I can't help but I'm going to sidestep into one. I promise I'm not trying to psychological profile you here, but I always find it interesting talking to executives because so many of you guys you watch the share price you're on it like a dirty shirt, you're all over it, right? And I think it's so interesting because simultaneously you have to inhabit this long-term vision like you just discussed with Lundin's, and that eye on the prize, that the next drill campaign. And you just said it, right? I mean, even in success, there's so much failure that's built into it and baked into it, and the ability to understand and kind of sort through the noise and maintain focus on 5 years down the road or whatever. But so that long term patience, but then it's kind of tempered with or that tension where bad share prices can destroy good companies, and it's not fair, but it's just the reality of how, especially this poor market, right? And so it made, like I said, promise not try to create some sort of profile on you that I'll put up on co.ch tomorrow or whatever. But
It's all right. It's all good.
what are I mean, what how do you what is your approach to that, right? Is it kind of a guilty pleasure? It's something that you know you shouldn't or you do, or is it something that you actually do view as kind of important to your keeping your finger on the pulse, so to speak?
Well, it's very important, right? And maybe you don't need to fixate on the share price necessarily, depending on whether or not there's some transaction, whether that's a placement or something, where at that exact moment the share price matters. But it feels like a minute by minute, second by second report card on how you're doing, and it doesn't always feel connected to how you're doing, right? It feels about 10% connected and 90% just like capricious, right? So it's like it's tough, and you get neurotic, and you really,
Yeah.
when you're in a protracted downturn, particularly when people start talking about like technicals, and they're like, and you can see that the chatter on Twitter or co.ca, like, oh, Fireweed, like this is, it's in a downturn, it's not going to break until it hits this resistance and stuff like that. And it's like, so often they're right, and it just makes you fucking nuts, right? Because you're like, right, because you want to say, no, we're gonna turn this around, and because it's the trading's stupid, it's arbitrary, right? And
Yeah.
so you have to kind of stop taking it personally, and which is not always taking it less personally. I would say not stop taking it personally, because it always feels personal. It always does, and I think going into this is fundamentally entrepreneurship, and I think honestly a often or not spoken about enough trait of a successful entrepreneur is resilience, because it is full of setbacks. And it is full of these little moments of judgment that feel deeply unfair. Um, and you have to just, stick it like, okay, all right, well, I don't like this, but what choice do you have but to pick up and keep moving, right? So, because I think it can break you if you really let it.
And that's interesting too, because I was going to sidestep this question, but I think maybe you kind of led me back to it. If you look back on, like you say, IPO was 5-6 years ago, and that was your first kick of the can as a CEO of a publicly traded company. Is that yeah? So I. What lessons did you have to learn? Kind of what was your wake up call, or what, looking back, what were the things that the skill sets or attitudes you had to acquire to make it to this point?
I think I had the good fortune that Fireweed is substantially more complex now than when I inherited it. So I was able to learn on the job, right? And bit by bit. Um, there's been so many little lessons about. I think you just look at my first talks versus my talks now. I just clearly more comfortable. I think I have a much better understanding of what resonates and what doesn't. Doesn't mean that I nail it every time, right? I'm not up there, like Robert Friedland, whatever you may think about his presentation style, right? With the audience just like, oh, like it's not, I'm not there. But, learning about that, learning about how to storytell, realizing how much of a CEO's job is storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
um, how to manage people. I'd never managed a lot of people before, and now when you consider the totality, particularly of contractors we have on site, and it's a whole lot of people that are directly or indirectly working for me, for the company. So, um, how to you know have authority, right? And it's not that I don't like wield authority like a stick, but you have to be authoritative, right? And you have to make decisions, right? And that's something I've learned a lot about is like that it's always going to be imperfect, right? That
Mm-hmm.
you're never going to have all the data perfectly analyzed, pointing to a clear decision. There's always going to be imperfect data and ambiguity in outcomes. And you have to make a bit of a call, and then not beat yourself up. First off, you don't even know if it's the wrong call because again, you can't go back in time and try the other call to see how it turns out, right? So you don't know what could have gone wrong with that other call. Sometimes it's apparent that it was the wrong call, but so you have to kind of give yourself you know, a little bit of allowance to make mistakes.
Interesting. I'm going to circle back to something you referenced earlier. You discussed the storytelling aspect of being, C-suite, but being the CEO in particular, right? And that part of your job is creating not just Fireweed the company, but Fireweed the narrative. And you sell in so many different ways to so many different people all the time, right? And one thing I think that you get credit for, and I think when I think about executives in the industry, you do stand out, and usually for good reasons, right? That's what. So my question around is you are active on CEO.ca, right? You're active on retail boards, and I think that you're not the only one. I think that you stand out, and I don't mean to be biased. I think I try to be objective with this, but I think you do a good job of using that medium well to contribute to. I mean, you discuss it yourself. I mean, you're trying to build a strong investor base, sticky hands, people that know the story, and people that can buy in and be patient, let the story be told properly through the drill bit, not just through you, right? And I think it's credit to you and your team that's part of it. On the flip side of that, I can name again without naming names, but I can think of executives that maybe I think they should stay off CEO.ca, and I
Yeah,
can think
yeah. There's
right.
yeah, and it's yeah that is a needle to thread, right? And it's a discussion. It's been a discussion with my board, and the conclusion was like, okay, keep doing what you're doing, but just maybe don't get into pissing matches, right? Right, which I've unfortunately done a few times, but um, so yeah, it's tough, right? And I think you know I want to create the impression, which I think is accurate, that we're accessible, that we're honest, that we're doing our best, um, and that we're operating on a long term maximal strategy to the best of our abilities. Um, I tend not to be hyper promotional. I don't like making promises that I can't deliver on. I don't mind like if I think this is the spectrum of outcomes skewing towards the better end of that, right? That's just sales, right? But I don't want to pass that confidence interval where I'm like, well, I'm kind of promising something now that's deeply unlikely. Um, but I do see other CEOs who like lying, or maybe not lying, but like being excessively promotional, whatever you want to call it, is a short-term strategy for sure. But it can work, and you can churn a short-term strategy. There's a sucker born every minute, so you can when the current crop of suckers figures it out, you can sell it to the next crop of suckers, and it is unfortunately a successful strategy in this industry. Um, Not for everyone though, right? If you don't do it extremely well, it works for a tiny little bit, or maybe not at all. People just see right through it because you're just not convincing enough, right? So, um, it's just never. I'm a terrible liar. I'm a truly terrible liar. So it's just never been like a. I cannot take that approach. I just can't. I just like it wouldn't work. Everyone would see right through me. So you know understand what you're good at and what you're not. But I do it. You know I have to manage like my I don't know envy whatever when I see someone and it's not even I don't know envy. I'm not envious that they lied and succeeded. Right. Um, manage that like frustration with the fact that they're getting traction, you're not on the back of um, you know what I think is fiction, right? So, no, I digress. And point being is that like yeah, I try to be accessible. I try to be sincere, occasionally irreverent. I like to make jokes, right?
Yeah,
Um, you know, I think take your work seriously. Don't always take. Doesn't mean you have to take yourself super seriously,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I think I project confidence, but also hopefully some humility.
Yeah, excellent. No, I think that that's if I think your self reflection there is accurate. I would agree that that's some your persona, such as it is with the market. And I think discussing that it's so easy the cart before the horse thing, right? Pursuing short term share price in terms of like you say the pumping or the maybe not lying but not telling the truth, obfuscating the truth. That sort of approach it can produce short term results, but it also is also quite often kind of contradictory and directly oppositional to long term value, right? I think that you have to. I think that the risk with so many retail, you can say, I mean, so many people that are maybe new to the sector or maybe not totally. I always think of the Dunning Kruger. Dunning Kruger shucks, what's it? Where the idea is when you know a little, you think you know a lot because you
Yeah,
don't know all the things you don't know, right? And I think
yeah,
that happens. That's a risk that people fall into with this sector in particular. And so that ability to tell a story and focus on long term narratives and focus on long term value building, you can lose the impatient or you can lose the undereducated. That's the risk, I suppose, right? But I think that I mean if you speak about anybody who's in this sector as an investor knows this is a deep end of the pool, and half the time you've got rocks tied around your ankles, right? That it's risky as hell, right? That most don't make it, yada yada yada. And I think that, and then again, why I think your approach resonates with me and with others is that I think that this is what I always say is that people just want to know the risks. They know there's going to be it's risky as hell. They know when they're buying a project that it has its own unique flavor and characteristics that make it risky. It's just that it's the nature of knowing what those risks are and having an executive team that actually tells that story without hiding those kind of the dangerous corners of it, right? And I think again, like I mean, you're very upfront, and again, testament to your kind of public facing abilities. You're quite upfront with the challenges of being, a remote locale in the Yukon, right? That sort of
yeah.
thing. And but I mean, that digression aside, I'll get off my soapbox here. I do want to talk about kind of getting back to questions around the discussion of success, right? And I do want to talk about you call him Geo Jesus, right? Jack Milton. I mean, he just won an award, right? You guys and your
Yep.
team just received an award like a month ago or so, a few weeks back. And so, I want to, and I think, you touched on, you're not an autocrat and you focus on having a team that is able to make, empowered to make decisions and challenge you on decisions. I want to talk about like the geological models because I mean, like you said, I mean, two of these, your projects are not new; they've been well explored, but you've come at them with a new sort of focus that has produced new results and rejuvenated, revitalized them, and kind of rebuilt them in a way that they're different than they were before you took them. I mean, Hudbay had an MRE for MacPass 2007. Rio Tinto had Gayna for a while, right? So you had big names theoretically with big strong teams and experts and the budget to kind of throw at it to make it happen, and they passed, right? And so I don't know if I want you to kind of look at this more of a general sort of a view. What did Jack and the team? How did they turn this on its head to come at it to find that success? And maybe I will ask this generally, but more specifically, like what is it? I mean, these are SEDEX deposits. What when you talk about finding massive sulfides, what specifically has Jack? So like a two-part question here, if I'm rambling on too much, is generally speaking, what is it that Jack has done differently? But then in particular, that geological model that's producing these improved results. What are you targeting differently?
Well, right away, it's that it's not a SEDEX. So the term SEDEX is short for sedimentary exhalative, and in this This term was actually first used in a master's thesis for the Tom deposit. Um, and there was this idea that you had these growth faults and these hot fluids coming up, and these hot fluids would come out into this deep basin where the waters were anoxic, sulfur rich, and they would put the lead and zinc in these fluids would react with the seawater, form sulfites, and precipitate out of the water column. So it's exhalative. It's exhaling these sulfides. We now know that's not true. That the textures that look exhalative are a result of barite precipitating out of the water column and subsequent inhalation, or whatever you want to call it, of these zinc and lead rich fluids, which react with the barite, scavenge the sulfur from it, and form zinc and lead sulfides. And they maintain the textures because they replaced barite. They maintain that texture, which is why they look exhalative. They look like they precipitated out of the water column when you look at the rock. So that was a big thing. Now the science that has kind of turned that on its head has really been the last 10, 15 years, to the point of when we launched Fireweed. There was a running joke about the older you were, the more likely you were to think it was exhalative, and the younger you were, the more likely you were to think it was replacement. So we kind of, as far as we're concerned, the matter is settled, and this is certainly the big SEDEX deposits in the world, or now we call them shale-hosted base metal deposits, or shale-hosted zinc lead deposits. Like the geologists at Red Dog do not think it's exhalative, and certainly there's less exhalative textures at Red Dog. The barite there is quite massive, right? So you don't get the fine laminations, which gives you the impression that it's exhalative. But when this area was explored, and really the last drilling, other than a few met holes that Hudbay did in 2011, the last real exploration drilling in the district was 1991, and a lot has changed. So you think about the China growth super cycle, 2003 to 2011, 12. This district saw nothing, no work, other than some gold exploration, which we'll get to. Looking for the wrong type of gold deposit, but nonetheless, they were looking for gold. And so us coming at this, almost 30 years later with new science, and there was this dogma on the formation of Tom and Jason, which is that they were the same part of the stratigraphy, and that if it's exhalative, there's syn sedimentary, which is to say the deposits are forming as the sediments are being deposited, and therefore there is this event during the sedimentation at one point in time that caused these deposits. That is the point in the stratigraphy everywhere in the district you want to look at, because that whatever was going on, that was this event, and so that's the point of stratigraphy you want to look at. If you know it's replacement, that's not how you explore. Now you're looking for chemically reactive horizons, right? Namely barite horizons, and we now know that Tom sits above Jason in the stratigraphy. Jason sits above Boundary mostly, although Boundary actually has some mineralized horizons at the same level as Tom and Jason. Boundary goes all the way down until we think about like the lower horizon, which we haven't talked about much, but that was a thing we talked about in 2020. That's like Ordovician slurry, and that's the age of nearby Howard's Pass, host rocks. So huge, prospectivity across various parts of the stratigraphy. So you cannot be driven by where you are in the stratigraphy. You have to be driven by nearby structure, chemical reactivity, fluid flows, and then just data, like where are you seeing zinc lead anomalies, where are you seeing gravity highs, and so that's it was the maturation of the science, right, that really led us to approach this differently.
And I think a natural follow-up to that, it's a bit of a gimme maybe, but in terms of, I mean, since the fall of the Berlin Wall, there's been, a couple of holes drilled sort of thing. That's a substantial length of time in terms of technological innovation. Is there something from geophys that you can point to that, if the guys in the 80s had it, maybe they would have understood this differently, or with what it made, because I think sometimes, it's not a science project, and so you don't have to know it perfectly. You just have to know it well
No.
enough to master it as an exploration company. Are there things that you have access to that they didn't, that you think is a deal maker or deal breaker in that regard?
I mean, powerful computers is a good start, and I'm
Yeah,
serious because
yeah.
like Jason was found because of this gravity anomaly. Although they drilled the gravity anomaly, it didn't hit something, and they drilled nearby because there was a soil anomaly, and they found it. It's like, oh, that wasn't the gravity anomaly. We now know from doing like super detailed lidar, like the terrain, mapping, and then using a lot of computing horsepower to correct the gravity for the terrain.
Mhm.
Because the terrain around you, like if you got mountains right up next to you, that actually makes your gravity slightly less because you've got those rocks kind of
Hmm.
pulling you up now, right? So like this is like percentage, like minute percentage of a minute percentage, right? But this is measurable in a gravimeter. So this super detailed terrain correction takes a lot of computing horsepower. Was not available back then. That they could do like very basic corrections only, and it moves anomalies. Some anomalies appear out of data that does not appear to have an anomaly. Some anomalies disappear. Some anomalies move. Right. So that's a big thing. Is being able to correct for that. Um, Other than that, it's um, and I think like a lot of the airborne work we've done has allowed us to kind of appreciate the structure and look at these lineaments and try to look at the intersection of these major fault and the second order fault. Um, but I think most of it was just different thinking. Coming at it a little bit more, getting a little bit luckier. The boundary west massive sulfides. We when we hit there's the main massive sulfide horizon there, and then there's the layer above it. Where 2021 we hit 10 meters of 24% zinc. That layer is a bit patchier than the main one, which is where we've been getting most of our good intersections in that area. Um, there was an old Kaminko hole that came within about 4 meters of that horizon. They went through they were drilling through the rocks that they knew were the right rocks because of the right part of the stratigraphy. They went through a fault. On the other side of the fault, they were in the wrong rocks, and so they shut down the hole. 4 meters further, roughly based on where we map things in Leapfrog, they might have made that discovery. So like it's and sometimes it's not like the rig workers, so the drillers don't know from rocks. So that shift happened to end, and the geologist was like, "No, shut this down here." Um, if they had crossed that fault early in the shift, they might have done another 20 meters before the morning when the geologist came to look, and they might have made a discovery, right? So these are like these crazy stuff, and we can be thankful that sometimes someone else gets unlucky and it allows us to get lucky, right? So, but yeah, I think computing's a big one. We've used machine learning a bit on soils to try to kind of map stuff. Um, no AI or anything like that, yet. I think I could rant about this, but we have such a data quality issue across the industry that it's going to be tough to really get AI to make good sense of stuff, particularly when you've got so many different sources of data, and maybe inconsistencies across them. Right? It's tough to really get a machine to appreciate those nuances and spit out anything other than garbage.
So I'm going to have to sacrifice a topic here because I think I might ask you just I want to talk about infrastructure. We just got a few minutes left here. I want to respect our time limits here, but
We should
uh,
get to the indexes as well because I know
yeah, okay, all right.
that was a requested question.
That's right.
So
That's right. That's one that. All right. Well, so let's go to that. I'll put a pin in it. Maybe we can have. I'll ask you maybe to discuss that more at a later date. That idea of
yeah,
not having good enough data. But so yeah, SILJ. Let's do it real fast, right? SILJ. So you're in 798,000 shares. I'm not sure what questions that individual had. I mean, the questions I have is your 58 holdings, 0.1% for SILJ is your current position, or is their position, whatever that means, right?
Yeah.
Fireweed's position in SILJ. I mean, are there discussions ahead of time? Like, do you know from the index? Is there discussions or conversations? When do you, or when did you find out that you were going to get this include? You're going to be included in the index.
Well, they never told us, and I don't know that they would, because I guess there's a possibility we could front run it.
Mm.
Um, so they never talked to us, but I'd have to talk to someone else in the index of whether or not they ever talked to these guys. We'd sent them some messages like on LinkedIn and stuff like that. We thought we were trying to get the right people. And we're like, hey, like you should consider Fireweed. We have a lot of silver. And the weighting there is not just, it's like how much silver you have, and then also, or how much revenue from silver, and how much of your total metal is silver, can scale it down a little bit, right? Your weighting. Um, so we had no idea whether they were listening to us or what. I assumed we had missed this quarter because we'd never got a response from them. So it was a bit of a surprise to come in, but this was an effort, right? And I appreciate people, I think there was a concern that is this just going to contribute volatility? And well, I mean, yeah, volatile. It went up a lot, right? So they bought in, right? And they're unlikely to next quarter just cut us out. Maybe they de-weight us a bit, right? But that's not going to be anything like the selling that the buying was. And day to day, as people buy that ETF or sell it, they're going to trade, buy a little bit, sell a little bit, right? We figured that they're going to probably increase our volumes 15 to 20%, I think, on average, based on what we're trading right now. So,
You,
um, so go ahead.
no, go for it. You go for it.
I was going to say, and volume's important. Like even non-directional or direction neutral volume, which is what this is going to mostly be, unless silver goes on a real run. And like if silver goes on a real run, we're not going to have to wait for people to figure out that Fireweed has silver, because people are going to, without knowing who the hell Fireweed is, are going to buy SILJ, and it's going to cause buying in Fireweed. So I think that's good. Right now, if silver, completely shits the bed, that's obviously not ideal, right? But so this increase in volume, we recognize we've been doing a real effort to understand what indexes we can get in and what ETFs, we can get in. You got to understand first that a zinc tungsten company, there is substantially fewer in ETFs that apply to us, substantially fewer funds that trade that will look at us. There's a huge amount of precious metal funds. Then there's a bunch of battery metal funds and some copper funds or whatever. There's not a lot of broad play in the market kind of mining funds. So we're already kind of disadvantaged versus a gold company, right? Or a copper company for that matter. There's copper's indexes. There's not a zinc index. There's a kind of a unique niche critical metal one that we might try to weasel our way in. Strictly speaking, you're meant to be a producer, but we noticed they have some exceptions in there, and there's no doubt that we're a heavy hitter in the tungsten world, right? And they got a tungsten company in there that's small potatoes compared to us. So, but I think there's other funds out there that not ETFs or whatever that might like to look at Fireweed, but have specific rules around position sizing, both maximum and minimums, right? And how big their position can be in terms of days of liquidity, right? They may say we can never be more than, our position size is $1 million limited because we don't want to manage, a 1,000 positions. And it can't be more than 10 days liquidity. So if you're not trading $100,000 a day, we cannot trade you. So we've had that happen before. So these kind of non-directional volatility or volume can help us gain access to those funds now. So this is all part of the puzzle of gaining liquidity, and liquidity attracts investors and stuff like that. And it's kind of weird because you often think of like junior mining, like, well, I want it super tight just so that like a little bit of liquidity, like sends it to the moon. And so, yeah, sometimes that can work when you're small and you're retail focused. By the time you're Fireweed's, probably not going to get to $1 billion valuation, which I think we can achieve. I don't think we're going to get there on retail buying. We're going to need institutions behind us, and those institutions are going to need to feel comfortable that they can trade in and out of their positions. So SLIJ and all these things are just part of that puzzle to unlock that capital for us.
I think it's really interesting because I think that one of the few, not to get too cynical about the state of the market, but one of the few advantages that retail does have is that they are smaller, and there's an ability to be agile and nimble in a way that these larger ones cannot, right? That scaling in and out
Yeah.
of positions just cannot do it, right? You got 5 minutes, Brandon, or
Yeah. Oh,
should I
absolutely.
call it?
5, 10. You take what you need.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, I think that let's transition. I do want to talk about just infrastructure. I have a couple of questions, one around Skagway and one around the Yukon Resource Gateway program. Just because, I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, again, anybody who knows the story, it's a fantastic project. So not quite the boonies, but next door to the boonies, right? And so of course
Pretty.
infrastructure.
I mean, so we had to go there in winter once, and we left a guy at camp while the helicopter went out fully loaded, and then the helicopter came back, and he prepped stuff to load again. And we kind of wondered when the helicopter had left him, and he was alone there, whether he was the most alone person in the world, because there would have been nobody within 180 kilometers of him, right?
Yeah.
And can you think of anyone else who'd be anywhere else in the world that you're likely to be like you could draw a circle 180 kilometers around you and there'd be nobody
Yeah.
there, right? So this is remote, right? Like, don't we have a road, which is good,
Yeah.
but it's remote.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, and then you start to hear the wolves howl, and you start to wonder how long the
Yeah,
helicopter
yeah,
is going to
exactly,
take you
right.
back, right? Yeah. So I mean, nearest. So let's talk about Skagway, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
a couple months old now. Nearest port. It's kind of a natural potential destination for your concentrate, for your project, for your product. 800 kilometers. So the government, $21.4 million has been dedicated to a marine services platform, and so this is one that you and I just wanted to clarify. I asked you if it was going to be a range of questions that you just didn't have the answer to, that I would sidestep it. But I thought you gave a pretty articulate answer, off air. So I mean, can you just discuss like what is that? Right? What it is a marine services platform? What does that money buy? And the question that I had around you that you kind of corrected me for, and I'll ask you just to correct me again on air now, is questions around kind of daily export capacity, right? And then now versus projected post expansion once it opens up. And I'll pause there because I think you kind of understand where I'm going with this. But do you want to touch on that?
yeah. I think for context, for people not in the know, Skagway is a little coastal town in Alaska. It's referred to
Beautiful.
as Yukon.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's beautiful. This fjord, Yukon's port. It was important during the gold rush because people landed there and then went over Chilkoot Pass and stuff like that. To get into the Klondike and explore for gold. 125 years ago. Um, they get a lot of cruise ship traffic in summer. A lot. They can have four, I think up to five cruise ships there, and people can go look at the Skagway cruise ship and take a look at some images. Like, it's ridiculous. This little town of 200 can have like 5,000 passengers there, right? And so this is for them in that cruise ship season. It is a money making machine. They sell these people the stupid trinkets and stuff that has nothing to do with Alaska, right? Like all these tourist trap stores and stuff like that, and the $12 coffees or whatever, right? So this is this is a major source of income for the town, and then the town gets very quiet over winter. So there's traditionally been a concentrate loading port there since the days of Faro. Cypress Anvil up until it was operating Faro when it shut down, and they shipped quite a bit of concentrate out of that port at Skagway. The shed is only about half the shed that they were using remains, and that up until recently, under the closure of the less than graceful closure of the Minto mine in Yukon, that was being used by Minto for their copper concentrates, which were going to Japan, I believe. So there was all this back and forth to the community because Yukon really, really needed that port for tidewater access to get concentrates to Asia, and I think the residents of Skagway were kind of pretty neutral, or maybe not even just neutral, about whether or not they wanted concentrate loading there, particularly considering that when when Faro did most of its loading at Skagway, it was pretty messy, and it's left some contaminants, lead contamination in particular in the harbor there. So I think people were pretty iffy on whether or not they wanted. I think the thinking was like, no, let's tear that all down and just make space for another cruise ship in summer, right? Let's have 6 at once. But credit to the Yukon, I think there was a very and the people of Skagway, serious discussion about where the priorities were, season around business, our duty of responsibility to our largest ally, etc. And the Yukon government agreed to fund a marine services platform that will be somewhat agnostic in how it's used, but one of the uses potential for this marine services platform could be either for retainers, so you take the concentrate in the containers and dump them into the hold, or a mobile conveyor setup to convey the concentrate into the hold. So this is huge, right? So that this significantly de-risks a lot of projects, us, casino, et cetera, that's kind of locked down. And I don't know how real the risk was it wasn't going to happen. It always kind of felt like it was, but I think it took a little longer than all of us were comfortable with, and but it's done, right? So that they've got this commitment, I think, for the next 40 years or something like that. Now for Fireweed, I don't, like the base case in our PEA was it all would go through Skagway, and go to Asia, whether that's China, Korea, Japan, all the concentrate. I'm substantially less convinced now. In theory, it's a bit more expensive to get it to Trail in British Columbia, which is Teck's smelter there. Um, but Teck is buying their concentrate on the Pacific, fundamentally. It's in port there, and bringing it to Vancouver or Portland and then railing it into Trail. So actually, us dropping it off at their doorstep is cheaper for them, right? So you can often kind of split the difference on those transportation costs. So there's going to be a negotiation of how that split works exactly. But I think it could end up being cheaper or very comparable to send it to Trail. So depending on Teck's appetite to take our concentrate and given their repeated investment in us, I would say that their appetite is not zero. Um, we may not send a huge amount through Skagway. And your point about capacity. Yeah, look, if and there's a private company, Broden, which is in joint venture with the local First Nations, is hoping to finalize their rights to what's left at the Faro mine, the Van Gorda deposit, the pit there, and the Grummer Grizz or something like that, one of the other buried deposits. If that us casino, never mind Howard's Pass, which is owned by the Chinese, and I'm not sure where that's going. All these are producing at once. They were all going through Skagway. That's a lot, right? There's a lot more than Faro was by itself. And it's going to definitely push the facilities there to the limit, even with the new design, right? But I think whether maybe using the White Pass rail for moving concentrate and perhaps storing it elsewhere and then bringing it down only just in time for the ship loading, rather than storing it all in Skagway, may help alleviate that. We're looking at a lot of things. It's not something that keeps me up at night. Like, I think we're going to be fine there. We've got, for us, some will go to Skagway, some will go to Trail, I think. We've got options. All of our options, unfortunately, by virtue of location, are not cheap, right? But I think we've clarified those costs pretty well in the last PEA, and it's that's one where people really don't believe those numbers. If you don't believe my mining costs, it's tough for you to really dispute it, right? Unless you're like a sophisticated mining person. For trucking and stuff like that, we'll go phone some trucking companies in Yukon and ask how much it is to move, like buckets of concentrate from here to there, right? Like you'll get a sense of whether or not I'm full of shit. or my engineers are, right?
Pulling one over on you too, eh? So I guess that Tech and Trail thing was on my list. Was a natural follow up, and you articulated well all kind of things I wanted to touch on. And this the follow up question. Maybe this is just me kind of stating the obvious, but I mean, advantages and disadvantages is the key critical advantage of Trail and Tech and that smelter. Not to be punny, but the critical mineral aspect is that the big difference there, or what else is there that kind of that makes it a more attractive or potentially more attractive destination for you?
Well, it's economics fundamentally, right? Now Trail recovers germanium. germanium has not traditionally been a payable in concentrate. So this is, be wary of people who are telling you that they've got this great, germanium in their, zinc deposits. They're going to get paid $1 bajillion for it because there is no precedent for that. However, China is now refusing to export germanium and gallium. This may change. I think smelters like Trail, who have traditionally recovered germanium and sold it and as a freebie, are probably going to be a little reluctant to suddenly start making that a line item. But maybe, right? It's not going to be featuring in our economics, right? It'll be. We might come to a point where we state the germanium levels in the resource, and it is boundary in particular is pretty significant germanium levels. But yeah, and I guess it's a question as well of like, is there an advantage of keeping it in the country? Duties or whatever, some incentives within Canada to keep it within the country. I don't know. There's all sorts of emerging thoughts around critical metals, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out because it's been a lot of rhetoric. It's firming up into action. I think I think it's okay. Like honestly, whatever your feelings on the geopolitical tensions with China are, I think it's okay. Like let's take a tungsten. I think it's okay for North America to buy half their tungsten or tungsten projects from China. That's fine. But 100% or 80% is not fine. Right? This puts you in a bad situation. And so I just think, and companies are realizing that individually, that it's not great to have your entire manufacturing in one country. Maybe some geographical distribution, right? So whether or not there's a bifurcation in pricing for, Western sourced or ex-China metals, rare earths, tungsten, etc., TBD. This is going to be, I think, the most interesting thing to emerge is not these little incentives here and there, which are good, but it's going to be whether there's an actual bifurcation in pricing. I mean,
No, and it's interesting you say that. And I won't bring it up. That's a whole other rabbit that we won't chase this time. But that the question of if that will actually occur, right? That two-tier sort of pricing for tier one versus tier two, or for, like you say, ex-China versus kind of friendly free trade agreement countries. At what point, and then you can talk about like the environmental impact and how do you put dollar values on carbon and all the rest. But let's just put that in a pile and put it elsewhere for now. One last question here, and thank you for your patience and then letting me get through these. I've enjoyed this, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to kind of pick your brain here. But yeah, Yukon Resource Gateway program, and again, you talk China, so this is kind of Yukon's Built and Roads program or whatever, right? And so it's $50 million this year. $150 million over the next 5 years, kind of is the rough numbers. Is there anything that you could? Do you know? Have they earmarked that money already? Are you in conversations or communication with Yukon government in terms of it formally or informally about? Do you know if you'll be achieving benefits from that? How much of that road, that 800 kilometers, are you seeing that benefit from, et cetera, et cetera?
yeah. So I want to say it was 350 total was the total fund. I want to say, or was it 250? Am I?
Well, I just have the highway engineering project. The Yukon Resource Gateway was the whole thing, including all infrastructure. I think was 350. I'm just
Yeah.
looking at the
So,
resource
so
gateway.
71 million dollars of that. Now that was announced in 2016. Fireweed was not a thing when this was announced. Fortunately, there was some of it earmarked for the access to Selwyn Shihong's Howard's Pass, which is south of us. The biggest undeveloped zinc deposit or deposits project in the world. Doesn't seem to be going anywhere. And I think the Canadian government had a bit of apprehension, perhaps, about subsidizing a Chinese project in Canada. So we were fortunate that despite not being around when the funds were announced and actually allocated, there was a reallocation process, and $71 million of it was allocated to our access roads. So over half of that is the sealing of the Robert Campbell Highway between Faro and Ross River. So other than Old Crow, which doesn't even have a road to it, The rest of the communities in Yukon all have sealed road access, except Ross River. So this was a bit of a bone of contention with Ross River. I mean, this is a cliche, right? That all the communities with white people have sealed paved roads, and then this indigenous community, here's a gravel road, right? So it is a major step forward in terms of reconciliation, et cetera, that the Robert Campbell is getting sealed to Ross River. That benefits us as well, because that means now we're on sealed road from Ross River instead of from when we get to Faro. The second half, or slightly less than half of that $71 million is replacing the bridges on the canal, the North Canal, which is a huge, that's been a constraint for us now in terms of what we can get over the bridges, because some of them are pretty old and janky. That's huge. And with that came a commitment from the government that as we continue to de-risk and advance the project, they would look to allocate more funds, whether that's through Resource Gateway or something else. They recognize the Canal Road is their road, right? So it's theirs to improve, to make fit for purpose, right? So, and I think with Mac Pass, Mac Tongue, Snowline, all going to be reliant on that road. I think it's kind of a no-brainer that the I don't know, additional 80 million, I don't know, total thumbs suck that might be needed to fix that road versus the billions and billions and billions of economic opportunity up there between those three projects. It's kind of a no-brainer. So I firmly believe it's going to happen. It just has to happen in a way that manages our needs versus concerns with the First Nations, particularly around hunting access. So, you create a brand, because the road's it's not a great drive right now. I've driven it. It's not a good drive, right? So it discourages some hunters from going up there because it's a bit punishing. Um, and if you improve it, maybe that creates additional hunting pressure up there. So I know the government's working hard to engage and consult with the First Nations around how to manage that.
Interesting.
But definitely optimistic. And I think, the point I've made is that they should not have to choose between, environmental stewardship and economic opportunity. You should not have to say, okay, well, if we want economic opportunity, well, I guess we just have to accept environmental degradation. No, you should not have to do that. And there's no particular reason why that has to be the case here. So, very glad that there's progress happening on that. Looks like the this coming summer that the sealing of the Robert Campbell's going to be happening, or at least getting started. We know the engineering on the canal has gone out to tender, and I believe it's gone imported to someone. So it's getting started, right? So this is exciting for us.
Mhm. A couple of things in there resonate for me. I mean, both and right in terms of environmental versus economic progress. If you can do things right, it can be a both and, right? It can be it's not a mutually exclusive oppositional sort of approach, right? And I guess maybe, and this is a nice way to end because it's kind of where we started. You kind of started here with this the new boom for resource exploration in Yukon, right? And so, do you see municipal territory governments? Do you see an increasing, not, I mean, obviously there's been increasing interest and seriousness already, but looking forward, do you see further port access growth, pardon me, power grid improvement, those sort of things? Do you see more infrastructure dollars? I mean, are there whispers of that? Do you hear discussions about that?
Well, there's the 1.5 billion federally set aside for infrastructure to critical mineral projects, and this is like 50 million per company or government, depending on the maturity of the project and how shovel ready it is, right? So, um, I don't doubt some of that will go to Yukon. I think the big push for the Yukon is going to be grid connection to BC, and probably it's probably going to be additional power generation within Yukon. I think the Canadian government sees not just connecting the Yukon grid, which is an island, to BC as a priority, but it's also connecting all islands to each other for redundancy and robustness of Canada's grid, right? To allow that if we build a couple nukes in Alberta, that it can benefit BC and Yukon, or if we build a big new hydro plant in Yukon, or a wind farm or geothermal in BC, that it gets to benefit those provinces, right? Like, I think this all makes sense, but they need to be connected. They need to have this new smart grid, right? So I think that's a big push. I know Premier Range Pillay has talked to Premier Eby in BC, and they seem pretty serious about this grid connect. Mactung, you could connect Mactung to the Yukon grid. I don't know if Mactung is big enough to justify the power line, but if you did, you'll get it's fine. The Yukon grid will manage, right? But Mac Pass, yeah, the Yukon grid probably could manage, right? But then you add like a casino. Casino needs more power, or needs almost as much power as the entire Yukon grid, right? So for a casino to be on the grid, there needs to be a connection to BC. And I know that's been a priority of like the Rios and what have you of the world, that they are judged on the carbon intensity of their production. So they want to see the lowest carbon intensity possible. And this is the point I've made repeatedly to governments, is that we want to be the best miners in the world. That means safest, means lowest cost. It means, longest mine life, et cetera, and lowest carbon intensity, right? And the lowest carbon intensity is hard to achieve if they're not working with us on that, being able to provide that power to us.
There, I just got my title there for the interview, but so I mean, thank you for your patience. Yeah, we've run over, and I appreciate you letting me take this time here to kind of do the deep dive. Final thoughts, Brandon, to you.
No, I think it's been a good discussion. I think people should, appreciate that we could have gone for another hour or two, right? Because there's a lot of areas you can deep dive on these things, and I think whether on Twitter or co.ca or email or whatever, if people want to, continue to highlight questions they'd love to see asked, happy to jump back on this call in another quarter or something like that with a whole new, selection of stuff to deep dive on.
Yeah, more rabbits to chase, eh? No, that sounds
Yeah,
great.
exactly.
Yeah. No, thank you, Brandon. It's been good, great conversation, and yeah, I look forward to it. And I'll see you on co.ca.
Thanks a lot, man. Catch you later.
Thanks.